Hi, everyone. Welcome to Reasons Podcast. And on this podcast, we are going to talk about a very interesting and important topic on the incarnation of Christ. As we are about to celebrate Christmas in a few days' time, we have here with us Professor R.H. Duncan Lingdor. We call him Professor Duncan, who's been working in Northeastern Hill University in the Department of Chemistry. And Professor Duncan is a professor of chemistry, and he's been working there for 35 years now. And he specializes on a very interesting topic called quantum chemistry. And Professor Duncan has actually published a number of research papers, and his papers have been published in top journals like chemical reviews, and also other journals as well. Welcome to our podcast, Professor Duncan. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Zwala. It has been a great honor for me to be invited to this podcast of Reasons to Believe, and I hope I'll be able to do my best here.
Yes.
Thank you.
You know, Professor, as people who are believers in the biblical worldview, what is your understanding as a professor of a science on what we mean by the incarnation?
Well, the incarnation belongs to the realm of theology and belief, and it is a theological development that arose out of the historical fact of the birth of Jesus of Nazareth, which most historians by and large accept as a historical event. But the theological significance, and especially its significance for the salvation of mankind, is quite a separate thing altogether. The incarnation actually means that God has entered the human situation in every way imaginable. And that means that actually, as stated in the Gospel of John, the eternal Word of the Father became flesh or took on human nature. God became man. And that is the wonder and the mystery of the doctrine of the incarnation.
Wow. And Professor, if this incarnation was supposed to be of any meaning or significance to people who believe in this person called Jesus Christ, what would that meaning be?
Well, for one thing, it means that we have a God who, as man, understands everything what it means to be a human being. God, in the man Jesus Christ, has understood what it means, for example, to suffer and to undergo pain and to understand the temptations and the trials that human beings go through. But more theologically and soteriologically, the incarnation means that God became a man so he could redeem man, because only as a man could an atoning sacrifice be made for the sins of mankind. So we need a human savior, but one who is divine, of course.
Amazing, amazing. And you know what you just said actually reminds me of the fact that, Kenneth Samples, he's actually one of the research scholars of Reasons to Believe. He says that the doctrine of incarnation is actually one of Christianity's most dangerous ideas as well. And it also reminds me of a statement which was made by C.S. Lewis. He says, the Son of God became man so that sons of man can become sons of God. And I think what you just said, that has a profound meaning and importance of why we believe in the doctrine of incarnation as well. Now, Professor Duncan, what do we mean by the virgin birth? We know that, Christ coming into the flesh actually has to do with something called the virgin birth, to which many people in the scientific community are very antagonistic to. They said that we do not experience virgin birth. In higher animals, we require a male and a female partner and so on. But what is your take on the virgin birth?
The virgin birth is, of course, frankly speaking, a miracle that cannot happen naturally. Of course, instances of parthenogenesis or virgin birth are possible in lower forms of life, but certainly not for mammals or for human beings. So if we are to believe in the virgin birth, which means that Jesus was born of the Virgin Mary without a human father, then we have to place that in the category of miracle. Miracle means that we have to accept it by faith, being convinced of it, of course, for a variety of reasons, but ultimately the choice is one of faith.
Wow, amazing. And Professor Duncan, he's actually working with a very renowned professor of chemistry who was also one of the Nobel nominees. His name is Henry Schaefer. And Professor, in your field of expertise, and particularly in the field of quantum chemistry or quantum sciences, what is the possibility of a miracle happening? There's a lot of talk about quantum sciences being able to predict or predict a few probabilities of things happening that cannot be described by the laws of nature that we have right now. But as a scientist yourself, how would you answer someone who's actually very antagonistic to the word called miracle, as some would actually define a miracle as something that is beyond the natural laws of sciences that we have or the laws of nature that we have? So, what would your take on this be?
Yes. A miracle, by definition, is something that contradicts the laws of nature, the laws of natural science, and thereby, for the reasoning mind, it is an impossibility. And therefore, Christians who believe in a God have to attribute to it the workmanship of God Himself.
Oh, yes.
In other words, a miracle is an act of God. And since God can do everything, He can definitely, bypass His own laws and create a miracle. So a miracle is not an impossibility in the eyes of the believing world, but it is so in the eyes of the world in general.
Wow. Amazing, amazing.
But you asked me,
Yeah.
in the context of quantum science,
Yes.
what is the scope for a miracle? Well, I'll share a little thought on this, that quantum science has a concept called quantum fluctuation, where all sorts of improbable things, well, one may even say impossible things, can happen because everything is governed by the concept of probability, not certainty. And therefore, strictly speaking, there could be some space or chance for something impossible or highly improbable to occur. So, in that case, the concept of quantum fluctuation may, if properly interpreted, allow for the chance of a miracle.
Oh, wow. Amazing, amazing. So, what you're basically saying is that if, the quantum fluctuation allows, to a certain extent, the probability of something that we do not expect uniformly in the laws of nature that we have or we have described until now, that such things as a miracle would be possible. So, I think that is actually very profound as well. Any other comments that you would like to add on that?
Well, the concept of quantum fluctuations extends even to the beginning of the universe, where the Big Bang itself is viewed by some as a massive quantum fluctuation in itself. But as we know, since they're so highly improbable, they don't really happen
Yeah.
on a regular basis. And not only that, these are still natural events.
Yes.
Whereas in Christian belief, a miracle is strictly a supernatural event which requires the intervention of God.
Exactly, exactly. And I remember John Lennox's argument for a miracle. He says, when we have the laws of nature, only a divine being could actually superintend and do something, break what we know as the laws of nature and perform a miracle over there, because after all, he's the one who set the laws.
That's
So,
true. Yes,
yeah.
very true.
Yeah, so I think coming to the concept of virgin birth, for many people who try to think it in a very scientific way, trying to think of maybe the fertilization of the male and female gametes and so on, it might be an impossible thing. But if there is the possibility or the plausibility that God exists, and if He's the one that has actually given the laws of the universe, He alone is the one that can actually intervene and also, give us things like the miracles. And I remember once, we were talking about this with a group of scientists as well, how does science investigate things like the virgin birth, which is particularly a singularity event? So we come to something known as forensic sciences. And in forensic sciences, people actually try to study singularities as well. So perhaps thinking mind may not be able to grasp, the virgin birth in the normal form of biology that we have today. But if we were supposed to trace, the birth of Jesus Christ in that sense, maybe we could come up with forensic science and actually give us an explanation that this is a singular event that does not happen very frequently and happen only once in human history as well. And the significance of this is actually, it's huge. It actually has to do with the salvation of man as well. So thank you so much for sharing that, your insight on that. But a very important and interesting question that I want to ask you, Professor, is, now we've talked about the possibility of the virgin birth, but why was the virgin birth necessary?
Yes. By the virgin birth, the official doctrine is that uh, Jesus took his flesh from his mother, the Virgin Mary, and thereby he assumed human nature in all its dimensions except sin. Because the virgin birth meant that Jesus was born and conceived without sin, without original sin. As we all know the old story, the sin of Adam and Eve passed on generation to generation, and it is something that is inherited in the course of human existence. And thereby, in order to have a perfect Savior, we need someone who is without sin, who is fully human and yet without sin. It was in order to break this chain of sin that the virgin birth was, in our belief, necessary, because this ancestral inherited sin passed on from generation to generation could be broken only through a miracle of virgin birth, where Christ was born without a human father to pass on this original sin or propensity towards sin or sinful nature onto the descendants.
Amazing, amazing. And when it comes to the virgin birth, I remember a theologian by the name of William Newman. He actually came to Shillong. This was back in 2016. And he was actually giving an argument of the fact that Jesus was born of a virgin. And what he actually says, I think, is very important and very thought-provoking. When Christ was going to be crucified, all Mary had to do was name who the Father was. Jesus was there proclaiming to be the Son of God. All Mary had to do was just name who the Father of Jesus was. And Jesus wouldn't have been crucified if the Father was named.
If his father was named, that would discount all supernatural origin of Jesus and overthrow his messiahship altogether. Also.
Exactly,
and
exactly.
savorhood.
Exactly. And
but Mary didn't.
Oh yes, oh yes. And Professor, this would be the last question. I mean, as a scientist and someone who believes in the biblical idea that Christ was born of a virgin and that God actually became an incarnate Son of God, how or what would your message be to those who are listening to our podcast, as a Christmas message or something that you would like to tell them? What would you want to share at this time?
Well, dear friends, we're all human beings, and we are maybe searching for ultimate reality. Call it God, call it the impersonal absolute, or call it by whatever name you wish. We're looking for something beyond ourselves, and yet we're still human. So we're looking for this ultimate reality in human terms, because if it doesn't come to us in human terms, we'll be incapable of grasping it and understanding it. That's why, my dear friends, if we want to experience the ultimate reality, God, in human terms, we have to experience Him in the God become man, Jesus the Messiah.
Amazing, amazing. And thank you so much for your time, Professor Duncan. And I've enjoyed this conversation so much, thinking about the quantum sciences and talking things about miracles and also particularly the virgin birth. And I'm sure that the listeners will also be blessed by this talk. And thank you so much for your time and thank you for being with us. We wish you all the best in your journey in researching and also proclaiming the biblical ideas as well.
Thank you very much, Zwala, and wishing a happy Christmas and Happy New Year to all viewers. Thank you.
Yes, a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to our listeners. And ladies and gentlemen, we at Reasons to Believe, we have a few books that has been published by our international research scholars. And right now we are having our Christmas discounts. These 5 books that you see here on the table will only cost you 2,000 rupees. So if you're interested, the contacts and the details of how you can order these books will be given in the description. Make sure that you buy these books and keep them as your company during the Christmas season as well. With this, we come to the end of our podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to us. God bless all of you.